The road was almost empty that night. Only the sound of tires on wet asphalt broke the silence. A lone man walked along the highway, his boots heavy with dust. His coat was old, his face carried shadows of long days, and his eyes looked like they had seen more than most people could bear. The town ahead of him was small, almost forgotten by time. Neon lights flickered weakly, and the sign of a diner buzzed with a broken hum. He stopped outside the glass door for a moment. Through the foggy window, he saw a few people inside. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, an old man read a newspaper, and behind the counter stood a waitress with tired eyes. The man pushed the door open, and a small bell rang with a hollow chime. The smell of fried oil and burnt coffee filled the air. Everyone looked up for a second when he entered, then turned away as if nothing had happened. But their silence was heavier than words. He walked slowly to the counter and sat down on a stool, placing his bag at his feet. His hands were rough, scarred in places, as though life had not been gentle with him. The waitress came over. She didn't smile. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, her expression cold. "What'll it be?" she asked in a flat voice. The man thought for a moment. "Just a glass of water," he said softly. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like the voice of someone who didn't want to disturb the world anymore. The waitress frowned. Most travelers came in asking for coffee or food, not just water. Still, she turned, grabbed a glass from the sink, and filled it from the tap. She didn't bother to check if the glass was clean. She didn't care. She placed it in front of him with a sharp clink against the counter. The man looked down at the glass. The water was cloudy. A thin grease line clung to the rim. Inside floated something small, a speck of dirt or maybe a scrap of food. The glass was filthy, and the silence in the diner grew colder as people watched. One of the truckers smirked. "Guess that's all he deserves," he whispered to his friend. The man heard it, but he didn't react. He lifted the glass slowly, his hand steady. The waitress crossed her arms, waiting for him to complain, waiting for him to snap, but he didn't. Instead, he raised the glass to his lips and drank. Every eye in the room was on him. He drank it all in silence. The grease touched his tongue, the water tasted of metal, but he swallowed every drop without a word. Then he set the glass down carefully, as though it was the most delicate thing in the world. The old man with the newspaper shifted uncomfortably. The truckers chuckled under their breath. The waitress rolled her eyes, muttering, "Strange guy." The traveler didn't speak. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single coin, and placed it gently on the counter. He nodded to the waitress, a small, polite gesture, as if to thank her. Then he picked up his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out of the diner without another word. The bell above the door rang again, this time louder, echoing in the silence he left behind. For a long moment, no one moved. The truckers laughed again, but their laughter sounded forced. The old man lowered his newspaper, staring at the dirty glass still sitting on the counter. The waitress bit her lip, annoyed but also strangely uneasy. "Who was that guy?" one of the truckers finally asked. The old man folded his paper. His voice was low and rough, carrying years of weight. "Someone you don't want to disrespect," he muttered. The trucker frowned. "What do you mean?" He didn't even say a word. The old man looked at the door, as if expecting the traveler to still be standing there. But the street was empty. He shook his head. "I've seen men like him before. The quiet ones. The ones who don't fight back. They're the ones you should be afraid of." The waitress scoffed. "Afraid? He was just some drifter. Probably broke, probably nothing." But even as she spoke, her voice trembled slightly. Something about the man's silence, the way he accepted the insult without anger, gnawed at her. Outside, the road stretched into darkness. The traveler kept walking, his boots hitting the ground in a steady rhythm. The diner's neon light grew smaller behind him until it disappeared. He didn't look back. His steps were slow, but they carried the weight of a man who had carried heavier burdens before. Inside the diner, the dirty glass still sat on the counter, a quiet reminder of what had just happened. No one touched it. The truckers went back to their food, but their voices were quieter now. The old man kept staring at the glass. And the waitress, though she tried to act like nothing had happened, found herself washing the rest of the glasses more carefully than before. Something unspoken lingered in the air. It wasn't fear yet. It wasn't guilt. It was something deeper, something people didn't want to admit. The man hadn't raised his voice, hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't done anything at all. And yet, somehow, his silence was louder than anger. That night, as the diner closed and the town grew dark, the memory of the travelers stayed with them. None of them could explain why. None of them could shake the feeling that they had just witnessed something that would not be forgotten. And somewhere out on the road, the traveler walked on, carrying his silence with him like a shadow. The diner was quiet after the stranger left, but the silence did not bring peace. It felt heavy, like smoke hanging in the air. The dirty glass was still on the counter, a reminder of what had just happened. The waitress tried to push it into the sink, but her hand shook slightly as she did. She told herself it meant nothing, that the man was no one, just a traveler, just another drifter passing through. But deep inside, something in her chest would not settle. The truckers finished their meals, laughing louder than before, but the sound was forced. They teased the waitress, saying things like, "Guess your water's famous now," and that guy didn't even flinch. They made jokes, but every time the door rattled in the wind, they looked over their shoulders, as if expecting the stranger to return. The old man with the newspaper paid his bill and stood by the counter for a moment. He looked at the waitress with tired eyes. "You should have shown him respect," he said quietly. She frowned. Respect? For what? He was nobody. The old man shook his head. Nobody doesn't walk with eyes like that. Nobody doesn't drink poison in silence. His words lingered, but he didn't explain further. He pulled on his coat and left, the sound of his boots fading into the night. The waitress muttered under her breath, annoyed. But when she turned back to the counter, she found herself scrubbing glasses harder than usual, checking them twice. For some reason, she wanted the shelves to shine. By midnight, the diner was closed. The town was small, the streets empty. Lights flickered in old windows, dogs barked in the distance, and the night grew colder. The waitress walked home quickly, trying not to think about the man. But his face returned to her mind, the calm way he looked at the dirty glass, the way he thanked her with just a nod, and the silence he carried like armor. She tried to shake it off, but sleep did not come easy. In the stillness of her small apartment, she thought she heard footsteps outside her window. When she peeked through the curtains, there was no one. But her heart kept racing. Across town, the truckers had gone to the local bar. They drank more than usual, their voices louder, but every so often, one of them went quiet, staring into his beer. Finally, one of them said, "What if that guy wasn't just some drifter?" The other laughed, but uneasily. Then what? What's he gonna do? He didn't even fight back. The first trucker leaned closer. That's what bothers me. He didn't fight back. He just took it. Who does that? The bartender, an older woman who had worked in town for decades, overheard them. She set down a glass and said, "Some men don't fight because they don't need to. You don't know what he's seen. You don't know what he's capable of." The truckers went silent. None of them wanted to argue with her. They finished their drinks quickly and left, walking home through streets that suddenly felt darker than before. By morning, whispers had spread. The town was small, and nothing stayed secret for long. People in the grocery store mentioned the traveler. The waitress's neighbor asked her, "Is it true you gave him dirty water?" She pretended it was nothing, but shame burned inside her. Some said he was a soldier, back from wars no one in town wanted to talk about. Others claimed he was a government man, testing how people treated strangers. A few whispered darker stories, that he was dangerous, that he carried shadows with him, that he might return with others. The diner opened again at sunrise, but it felt different. The regular customers sat quieter, their eyes drawn to the door each time it opened. The waitress tried to act normal, but her hands trembled when she poured coffee. The cook, who had been in the back last night, finally asked her, "What exactly happened?" she told him, trying to laugh, but when she reached the part about the man drinking the dirty water without complaint, the cook frowned deeply. He wiped his hands on his apron, then looked at her with worry. "You should have treated him better," he said. She grew defensive. "Why?" "He didn't complain. He didn't even care." "That's exactly why," the cook replied. "A man who doesn't complain when insulted, that's not weakness. That's control. That's the kind of man who waits. And waiting men are dangerous." The waitress didn't answer. Her throat felt dry, and for the rest of the day she kept glancing at the door, half hoping and half fearing the stranger would return. As night came again, the town grew restless. Some locked their doors earlier than usual. Others stood on porches, looking down the highway. No one admitted they were waiting for something, but the feeling spread from house to house. Something was coming, they didn't know what, but they felt it. In the diner, the waitress closed up with shaking hands. When she turned off the neon sign, she looked out across the empty road. For a moment, in the distance, she thought she saw a figure standing at the edge of the streetlights. Tall, still, watching. Her breath caught in her chest. She blinked and the figure was gone. That night, the town did not sleep well. The traveler's silence had left a mark deeper than words. And though he had walked away without anger, the people knew in their bones, they had not seen the last of him. Morning sunlight fell over the small town, but instead of warmth, it only made the streets look emptier. The diner opened as usual, neon sign buzzing weakly, the smell of coffee floating into the air. But nothing felt normal anymore. Every time the door creaked, the people inside turned their heads too quickly, expecting someone who never came. The waitress moved nervously behind the counter. Her hands were steady now when she cleaned glasses, but her mind wasn't. Every sound reminded her of him, the scrape of boots on the floor, the faint jingle of the doorbell, the silence that had followed him. The cook noticed her unease. He didn't say much, but every so often his eyes drifted to the door too. By noon, the diner was busier. A group of mechanics, a few truckers, even a family with kids. The place was louder now, but underneath the chatter was something sharp, something that didn't fit. Conversations kept turning back to the same topic. "Did you hear about that man?" one mechanic asked. "They say he's some kind of soldier," another replied. "Soldier? No. He's government. Testing people. Saw it in another town before, same thing. But nobody really knew. They only had stories, rumors spreading like fire through dry grass. It was just past lunch when the first sign appeared. The sound of engines. Deep, heavy, not like the usual trucks that rumbled through. People inside froze. The cook stopped mid-slice, knife hanging over a tomato. The waitress lowered the coffee pot, her breath caught in her throat. Through the diner windows, dust rose on the road. Then came the vehicles. Black SUVs, polished and sharp, rolling into town like shadows with wheels. They moved slow, controlled, powerful. No one honked, no one shouted. They simply arrived, as if they owned the road. Every head turned as the first SUV pulled up outside the diner. Doors opened, and men stepped out. Not loud, not aggressive, calm, precise. They wore plain suits, dark sunglasses, and they moved with the quiet confidence of people who didn't need to prove anything. The diner grew silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Children stopped talking. Even the neon light seemed to buzz quieter. 3 men entered the diner. They didn't scan the room like intruders, they walked in as though they already knew the place. They chose a booth near the corner, sat down, and folded their hands. The waitress stared, frozen for a second, then forced herself to move. She walked over with a notepad, her legs trembling slightly. What can I get you?" she asked, her voice dry. One of the men looked up at her. His face was unreadable. "Water," he said simply. Her stomach twisted. For a second, she couldn't move. Then she nodded quickly and hurried back to the counter. She grabbed a glass, clean, spotless, shining, and filled it with fresh, cold water. Her hands shook so much she almost spilled it, but she caught herself. She set the glass in front of the man carefully, like placing an offering before a king. The man sipped once, nodded, and said, "Thank you." Nothing more. Nothing less. The rest of the diner watched, trying not to stare. The men ordered small things, coffee, sandwiches. They ate politely, paid generously, left large bills on the table. No threats. No warnings. Nothing strange. Yet the weight of their presence pressed on everyone like an invisible hand. When they left, the room stayed silent for a long time. Only when the SUVs pulled away did people start to breathe again. The waitress leaned against the counter, her knees weak. "They were connected to him," she whispered. The cook nodded slowly. "No doubt." The truckers in the corner exchanged nervous glances. One of them tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "Maybe it's just a coincidence." But nobody believed that. Later that afternoon, more whispers spread. The men from the SUVs weren't the only ones. People saw others around town, different faces, same calm movements. They went into shops, bought things, always polite, always respectful. But every person who spoke to them felt the same weight, the same cold truth: they weren't just passing through. They were here for a reason. That night, the diner closed early. The waitress couldn't stop replaying the moment when the man asked for water. Her mind went back to the night before, to the dirty glass she had slammed on the counter. Her chest felt heavy. The cook stayed behind after closing, staring at the empty seats. He muttered, half to himself, "He's not gone. This is just the beginning." The waitress frowned. But he didn't do anything. He just left. The cook looked at her sharply. "You think silence means nothing? Sometimes silence is the loudest warning you'll ever hear." She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Deep down, she knew he was right. That night, the town did not sleep easy. People locked their doors twice, looked out windows, whispered in kitchens. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The traveler's shadow had returned, not with shouting, not with violence, but with a quiet force that filled the streets and pressed into their hearts. And somewhere on the edge of town, beyond the reach of the streetlights, the man himself stood watching. His figure was tall, still, just a shape in the darkness. He didn't step forward, didn't make himself known. He only watched. And in the diner, where the dirty glass had once stood, the air still carried his silence. The town woke the next morning to a strange kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't natural. It was the silence of people who were afraid to speak too loudly, afraid that words might call something closer. The diner's neon sign flickered on again at sunrise, but even that small light felt heavy, as though it no longer belonged to them. The waitress arrived early. She spent longer than usual cleaning, scrubbing every table, every plate, every glass until they shined. Her hands were raw from soap, but she couldn't stop. She kept seeing his face, calm and quiet as he drank from that filthy glass. She kept hearing the way he placed the coin down, how he had thanked her with silence instead of anger. Guilt weighed on her like an anchor. By the time the cook arrived, she had already cleaned the entire counter twice. He looked at her with tired eyes and said nothing. He didn't need to. The weight on her shoulders was obvious. The first customers trickled in. They spoke quietly, not with the usual morning cheer. Their eyes kept moving to the windows, as if expecting black SUVs to roll past again. Some had already heard stories, men in suits walking into shops, asking questions no one understood. Others claimed they saw soldiers in town, not in uniform but moving with the same precision. And in every story, one detail never changed: the men were connected to him. By mid-morning, the diner was full, but the air was tense. Conversations circled the same rumor again and again. "He's a war hero, I heard," one man whispered. "Did things overseas nobody talks about?" "No," another replied. "He's worse. He's some kind of government inspector. They send him to test people. If you fail, you're finished." An old woman leaned in, her voice low. "That's not what I heard. My cousin said he's part of something bigger. A group. The kind that doesn't forgive disrespect." The waitress listened in silence, each word pressing harder into her chest. Every rumor made her feel smaller, weaker. She tried to focus on work, but her hands trembled whenever she poured a drink. She had disrespected him openly. If even half of these stories were true, what would happen to her? The cook finally spoke when the diner grew quiet again. His voice was calm, but his words cut through the room like a knife. You all keep guessing who he was. But you don't need rumors. Look at how he carried himself. Look at how his people carry themselves now. Men like that don't need to shout. They don't need to explain. They've already seen enough of the world to know exactly who they are. The room went still. Even the waitress froze, her breath caught. One of the truckers swallowed hard. So what are you saying? That he was military? The cook shook his head slowly. I don't know if he still is. But I've seen eyes like his before. Men who've gone to war and come back different. Men who don't need to raise their voice because they've already faced worse than anything we can imagine. He paused, his gaze heavy. That man wasn't nobody. He was somebody. And you all felt it the moment he walked in. The waitress gripped the counter, her knuckles white. She wanted to deny it, wanted to say he was just another drifter. But deep down, she knew the cook was right. His silence had spoken louder than words. That afternoon, the whispers spread beyond the diner. Children told each other stories about the ghost soldier. Shopkeepers said they had seen him on the edge of town, standing in the shadows. People began locking their doors earlier. And every time a black SUV drove by, hearts raced. The waitress couldn't escape her guilt. That night, when she closed up, she found herself staring at the shelf of glasses again. She picked up the one she had given him. She hadn't washed it since it was still there, hidden in the back, its rim stained. She held it in her hands, her throat tight. She thought about throwing it away, but she couldn't. It felt like more than a glass now. It felt like a mark of shame. The cook came out from the back and saw her standing there. You kept it, he said quietly. She jumped, nearly dropping it. I don't know why. He studied her for a long moment. Because you know what it means. You gave a man like that dirt when you should have given him respect. Her eyes burned. She wanted to cry but forced herself not to. Do you think he'll come back? She whispered. The cook didn't answer right away. He walked to the door, looked out at the dark street, then turned back to her. He doesn't need to come back. He already changed this place. Look around you. Everyone's talking, everyone's afraid. That's the power of one man who doesn't need to lift a hand. The waitress hugged the glass to her chest, shivering. She had never felt so small in her life. That night, as she walked home, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every corner seemed to hold a shadow, every gust of wind carried footsteps. When she finally reached her apartment, she locked the door twice and pulled the curtains shut. But even then, she dreamed of him, the quiet man at the counter, drinking from the dirty glass with unshakable calm. And somewhere, on the highway outside town, the traveler moved again. His figure walked beneath the dim light of the moon, steady and unhurried. He carried no anger, no violence. Only silence. But that silence was enough to unravel an entire town. The diner looked the same on the outside. The neon sign still flickered, the bell above the door still gave its hollow ring, the same booths lined the walls. But inside, everything had changed. The waitress no longer slammed glasses on the counter. She polished them until they sparkled, holding each one to the light as if a shadow might still be hiding on the rim. She served every customer with care, now extra napkins, clean cups, fresh water. She even smiled, though it was shaky at first. The cook noticed the change. He said nothing, but he watched closely. She wasn't just doing her job anymore. She was making up for something, trying to erase a stain that couldn't really be erased. The dirty glass had left its mark, not just on her, but on the whole diner. Regular customers felt the shift too. Truckers who once laughed loudly now spoke softer, tipping more than usual. Locals who once ignored strangers now greeted them politely. Something unspoken hovered in the air, the memory of the man who had sat silently, swallowed insult without a word, and left behind a silence heavier than anger. One evening, a family of travelers came in. They looked tired, their clothes dusty from the road. The children were restless, their parents worn out. Normally, some of the locals might have rolled their eyes or whispered jokes. But not this time. The waitress hurried over, her smile genuine. "Welcome," she said softly. "You must be hungry. Sit anywhere you like." She brought water in shining glasses, plates that were spotless, food that was warm and fresh. She refilled their drinks without being asked, offered the kids small candies, and treated them as though they were honored guests. The family smiled, relief on their faces. The children laughed for the first time that day. The mother whispered, "Thank you," and her voice cracked with gratitude. The cook watched from the counter. His lips curled into the faintest smile. Something was changing. The man had not returned, but his silence was still shaping the diner. By the end of the week, the whole town felt it. People stopped strangers on the street to offer directions. Shopkeepers greeted newcomers warmly. Even the truckers, once rough and dismissive, started holding doors open and buying coffee for travelers. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something deeper. It was respect. But the waitress still carried her guilt heavier than anyone. She often thought about the moment, the glass slamming on the counter, the grease on the rim, the way he drank without a word. She wished she could go back and undo it, but the past would not change. All she could do was make sure no one else ever felt what he had felt that night. Late one evening, after closing, she sat in the empty diner with the cook. The lights were dim, only the neon glow outside painting the room in pale color. She turned the old dirty glass over in her hands, the one she had never thrown away. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" she asked. The cook leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Maybe. Maybe not." She looked down. "If he does, I don't know what I'd say to him." "You won't need words," the cook said quietly. "You'll just need to show him. That's the real apology." She nodded slowly, tears stinging her eyes. She placed the dirty glass back on the shelf, far in the corner where she could see it every day. A reminder. A lesson. The town learned too. They whispered less and acted more. A man who fixed cars for a living stopped charging travelers who broke down on the road. A shopkeeper who once ignored outsiders began giving them discounts. Even the children carried the story. They told each other, "Be careful how you treat people. Remember the man with the glass." The legend of the traveler was becoming something else now, not just fear, not just guilt, but a moral carved into their lives. Yet, for all the change, there was still a tension under the surface. People knew deep down that it wasn't over. The traveler had not truly gone. His silence was still out there, waiting. One stormy night, the diner was almost empty. Rain pounded the windows, thunder rolled across the hills. The waitress stood at the counter, staring at the glass shelves. She whispered to herself, "I won't fail again. Not ever." The cook heard her but didn't reply. He simply nodded, knowing she meant it. When a stranger finally walked in that night, a soaked hitchhiker with tired eyes, the waitress rushed to serve him like he was the most important person in the world. She brought him a clean glass of water first, setting it down gently in front of him. Her hands didn't shake this time. The man looked at her, surprised, then smiled. "Thank you," he said. And in that moment, for the first time since the traveler had left, the waitress felt a small piece of peace return to her. The lesson was clear now. The man had not raised his voice, had not lifted a hand. But his silence had been enough to teach them all, how you treat the smallest act, like a glass of water, shows who you really are. And though he had not returned, everyone in that diner, in that town, carried his presence in their hearts as if he was still watching, still waiting, still measuring them in silence. The diner was busier than ever. What once had been just a roadside stop for truckers and tired travelers had turned into something else entirely. People came from nearby towns, and some even drove long hours just to sit inside the little place where the story had been born, the story of the silent traveler and the dirty glass. The waitress moved quickly between tables, but her steps were lighter now. Her face, once sharp with bitterness, was calmer. She greeted everyone warmly. The cook noticed that even her laugh was different now, softer, real. But beneath the new life of the diner, one question never stopped haunting them: would he ever return? Every time the door creaked open, the waitress felt her heart skip. Every new traveler made her hope, and then let her down. Sometimes she thought maybe it was better if he never came back. Maybe the silence he left behind was enough. Maybe he had given them their lesson and vanished forever. But fate had other plans. It happened on a cold evening. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in deep blues and gold. The bell above the door rang, and the chatter in the diner slowed as people glanced up. A man walked in. He wore simple clothes, worn boots, and carried no bag. His face was calm, unreadable. His eyes scanned the room once, then settled on a booth near the window. Slowly, he sat down. The waitress froze. Her hands trembled. She knew him instantly, though months had passed. The traveler. The one who had once been given a dirty glass of water. The one who had left without a word. The diner fell silent. Even the cook stopped moving. Every customer could feel it, the weight of his presence, the ghost that had haunted them now standing alive before them. The waitress took a deep breath. She grabbed the cleanest glass she could find, filled it with cold, clear water, and carried it to him. Her hand shook as she set it down. This time, there was no grease, no dirt, no insult. The glass sparkled under the light. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "For that night. For how we treated you. I can't take it back, but I've tried every day since to do better." The man looked at the glass. Then at her. His face gave nothing away. Slowly, he lifted the glass and took a sip. The diner seemed to hold its breath. He set the glass down gently, then gave a small nod. Just a nod. But it was enough. The tension in the room broke like a wave. People let out breaths they didn't know they were holding. The cook leaned against the counter, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. The waitress covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. The traveler spoke at last. His voice was calm, steady, but carried weight. "It's not the glass," he said softly. "It's the heart behind it. Remember that." Then he stood, leaving a few bills on the table. He didn't wait for change. He walked toward the door. The entire diner watched, frozen, as he stepped outside. The bell rang one last time. The night air swallowed him. No one moved for a long while. Then, slowly, people began whispering. "He came back. He forgave us. He said something this time." The waitress wiped her tears, but her smile shone brighter than it ever had. She turned to the cook. "Did you hear him? He spoke. He forgave us." The cook nodded. "No. He did more than that. He reminded us. Forgiveness isn't just words, it's a chance to live better." The story spread again, but this time it was different. People no longer whispered about the shame of a dirty glass. They spoke about the power of a second chance, about a man who taught them without anger, about how silence could be louder than shouting. Travelers kept coming, not for the food, not for the coffee, but for the story. They sat at the booth by the window, where the man had once sat, and they asked the waitress to tell them about him. She did every detail, every lesson. She never tired of repeating it, because each retelling reminded her of the change she had promised to keep. The diner became more than a diner. It became a place of kindness, of welcome, of respect. People said, "If you want to know how a stranger should be treated, go there." And sometimes, late at night, when the waitress was cleaning up, she would pause and look at the glass shelf. The old dirty glass still sat there, untouched, hidden in the back. She never threw it away. It was her reminder. Her burden. And her gift. The traveler never came again. Maybe he never meant to. Maybe his return that night was simply to close the circle, to let them know the lesson had been learned. But in a way, he never left. Because in every clean glass served with care, in every smile offered to a stranger, in every act of quiet kindness inside that little roadside diner, he was still there. And that was the unbelievable ending, not anger, not revenge, not destruction. Just a man, a glass of water, and a silence that changed a whole town forever.